What if you stopped aging today, right now, permanently? Your face, your knees, your metabolism, frozen at this exact biological age for the rest of your life, however long that turns out to be. It sounds like a gift, but by year 50, it becomes one of the strangest problems a human being could ever face. Aging isn't one thing. It's dozens of separate processes happening in your cells, your hormones, your brain, all ticking at once. So what happens if every one of those clocks just stops today, while the rest of the world keeps moving? I'm tracing this hour by hour, then decade by decade, because the early consequences are personal and strange. But stick around for number 2, where entire economies start bending around the fact that you, specifically, refuse to get old. And yeah, subscribe if you want the next thought experiment before it drops. Let's start the clock. Hour 1, nothing visible happens. Real aging is invisible even on a normal day. It's measured in molecular damage, not moments. But your brain doesn't know that. Within 24 hours, you start unconsciously checking mirrors more. A documented behavior psychologists call body monitoring, the same reflex seen in people after major medical news. By hour 48, something odd kicks in. Without the subconscious pressure of a ticking clock, decision-making studies suggest present bias weakens. You procrastinate less on long-term goals because long-term stops feeling scary. That sounds great until you realize deadlines, retirement planning, even urgency itself is partly built on the fear of running out of time. Remove that fear and your motivation architecture, the whole psychological system built around mortality salience, a real concept from terror management theory, starts quietly rewiring itself. Nobody knows exactly how a permanently non-aging brain would recalibrate ambition. That's the honestly speculative part. But the first ripple isn't in your skin. It's in your sense of urgency. And urgency, it turns out, runs more of your life than you think. By week 2, you go in for a checkup and your blood work looks identical to last year's. Same telomere length, the protective caps on your chromosomes that normally shorten a little every year, measured in kilobases. Telomere attrition is one of the real, measurable hallmarks of aging identified by biogerontologists, and yours simply isn't happening. Your doctor runs the test twice, assuming lab error, because this has genuinely never been documented in a real human. Here's where it gets speculative. Nobody knows if your cells still divide and accumulate senescent cells, the zombie cells linked to inflammation, or if that process halts too. If senescent cells keep piling up while telomeres stay fixed, you might feel young while quietly building the seeds of age-related disease anyway. If both freeze together, you're looking at genuine biological stasis. The unsettling part: modern medicine has no protocol for a patient who breaks the model entirely. You're not a data point anymore. You're an anomaly nobody built the paperwork for. 6 months in, your friends start noticing the small stuff. You haven't gotten that gray hair you were dreading. Your knees don't ache after the same hike. Social psychologists call this a violation of shared developmental timing, the quiet assumption that people your age move through life stages together. By month 6, that assumption cracks. Friends start feeling like they're aging past you, even though technically you're the anomaly. Real studies on social comparison theory show people unconsciously benchmark their own life satisfaction against peers. So watching you stay still while they visibly change can trigger genuine resentment or isolation. Not because anyone's wrong, just because the timeline broke. This is the first consequence that isn't really about your body at all. It's about the social contract of growing old together. Marriages, friend groups, even sibling relationships are quietly built on parallel decline. Remove yourself from that parallel and relationships that felt permanent start needing an entirely new kind of maintenance. But that's still just your social circle. Wait until this hits your paycheck. Year 5, you try to renew life insurance and the actuarial tables break. Insurance pricing is built entirely on mortality tables, real statistical models predicting death probability by age refined since the 1600s. Every one of those tables assumes risk increases yearly. Yours doesn't. Underwriters don't have a category for a body that stopped tracking with the Gompertz mortality law, the real mathematical curve showing death risk roughly doubling every 8 years of adult life. Insurers would either have to invent an entirely new risk class for you or refuse coverage outright, because their entire pricing model is a bet against your decline. And you're the one client not declining. Zoom out, and this is bigger than one policy. Pension systems, retirement ages, and social security frameworks in nearly every country are built on statistical aging curves at population scale. One non-aging person is a glitch. A few thousand would be a rounding error insurers could absorb. But keep counting, because by the time this scenario reaches millions of people, the entire financial architecture built around predictable decline starts to genuinely buckle. Quick question. How many people in your life right now will still recognize you in 50 years? By decade 2 of this scenario, the honest answer becomes almost nobody. Real longitudinal studies on autobiographical memory show most people's close social circles turn over roughly every 7 to 10 years through moves, breakups, and death. Now you're the fixed point watching every circle rotate past you, generation after generation, while you stay exactly as you are. Historians studying extreme longevity case studies, like supercentenarians who outlive their entire generational cohort, describe a real documented phenomenon called generational bereavement, where surviving far past your peers creates a distinct, repeating form of grief. Except in this scenario, it's not rare, it's guaranteed, and it happens on a loop. Forever. You become a living archive nobody else can verify. The last person who remembers how a street looked, how a joke landed, how a voice sounded before it was gone. That's decade 2. Decade 20 is where this stops being personal and starts reshaping how humanity even defines a generation. Now scale this up. Imagine this doesn't just happen to you, but the same freeze hits everyone at once. 50 years in, demographers model population using birth rates minus death rates. Remove the death side of that equation, and you get what ecologists call unbounded exponential growth. The same math behind bacterial colonies overwhelming a petri dish. Real UN population models already show strain from rising life expectancy alone. This scenario removes the ceiling entirely. Food systems, freshwater tables, and housing stock are all built on population projections assuming steady turnover. Cities planned for replacement-level growth would face demand curves with no natural cap. Resource economists call this a Malthusian trap, the classic tension between growing population and finite resources, except this version has no aging-driven release valve at all. Nations would face impossible choices around birth policy just to keep systems functional. Here's the twist nobody expects. The crisis wouldn't come from too many old people. There'd be none, biologically. It would come from simply too many people, full stop, forever, with no capacity where there once was room for the next generation to actually live. 100 years in, and here's the deepest consequence of all. Evolution by natural selection, the real mechanism Darwin described, depends on generational turnover. New gene combinations get tested against the world every time a new generation is born and an old one fades. Real population genetics calls this allele frequency shift across generations. Freeze aging permanently across a population, and you don't just freeze bodies, you freeze the species' ability to adapt. Diseases, climate shifts, even new pathogens would meet a population that can't evolve defenses the way it always has, because nobody is cycling out to make room for better adapted offspring. Geneticists studying long-lived species like Greenland sharks, which can live over 270 years, already note their evolutionary adaptation rate is dramatically slower than short-lived species like fruit flies. Now imagine that slowdown applied to humans at planetary scale permanently. This is where honest science hands off to real speculation. Some biologists argue culture and technology could replace biological adaptation entirely. Others think a species that stops evolving biologically eventually loses the flexibility that let it survive this long in the first place. Either way, stopping aging doesn't just change your mirror. It changes what it means to be a species at all. So the strangest part of never aging isn't your face in the mirror. It's everything built around the quiet assumption that people decline, retire, and eventually make room. Insurance, evolution, even friendship itself is scaffolded on that clock ticking forward. Stop it, and the ripples don't stay personal for long. So, here's what I want to know. If you actually got to stop aging today, at your current age, would you take it? Knowing everyone around you keeps moving without you? Tell me your age and your honest answer in the comments. I read all of them. If this kind of grounded, escalating thought experiment is your thing, subscribe. Because next episode, we're breaking something even bigger. Stay curious,